Hello, Virtual VGM Fest Ultimate. I'm Ranja, and today we're going to be making nut bread for Mother 3. The recipe we'll be using today is simple by design. I'm not much of a baker myself. But first we have to start by gathering all of our ingredients.
Okay, now that we're done with that terrible background noise, we're going to start off by measuring out 3/4 of a cup, or 180 milliliters, of whole milk that we will then warm to anywhere from 95 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, or 35 to 43 degrees Celsius. Next up, we're going to need 1 teaspoon, or 4 grams of salt, 1 1/4 teaspoon, or 5 grams of ground cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon, or 2 grams of ground nutmeg, 1/2 teaspoon or 2 grams of ground allspice. I didn't have this, so I instead used 1/4 teaspoon or 1 gram of ground cloves. You're going to need 2 large room temperature eggs cracked against the tabletop at the same time for the swag strat. Not pictured here, you'll also need 1/2 teaspoon or 2 grams of vanilla extract while you let your roommate get to his fridge. You'll get out your brown sugar and then realize that your bag is already ripped open, so you'll struggle to measure out 110 grams or 1/2 of a cup of packed brown sugar. You'll also need 5 tablespoons or 70 grams of room temperature unsalted butter. I think I let mine go a little too far and get to 2 room of a temperature, if that's even possible. Next up, you're going to need the nuts of your choice. You're supposed to have 150 grams of them, but I could only find this bag of 113 grams, but it's okay. And finally, in a bowl that's just a little bit too small, measure out 400 grams or 3 cups of all-purpose flour. You'll also need 1 standard packet, that's 2 1/4 teaspoons or 9.5 grams of yeast, either active, dry, or instant. And that's all the ingredients you need. Stick around for part 2 later in the stream. Welcome to part 2, where we're actually going to start baking. Okay, first up, in a large bowl, whisk together the warm milk with the yeast and a teaspoon of white sugar that I didn't mention earlier. Don't at me. Cover this and let it rest for 5 minutes for the yeast to bloom. Next, add the brown sugar, the butter, vanilla extract, eggs, salt, cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, remember we didn't have this so we used cloves, and 1 cup or 130 grams of your flour. Fold this together for about 30 seconds, scraping down the sides of the bowl. Fold in the remaining flour, and this is the step where you would add the nuts. I didn't add the nuts. Like an idiot. Beat this mixture together for 2 minutes until soft and lightly sticky to the touch. Add additional flour 1 tablespoon at a time if the dough is too sticky. Then turn your dough out onto a floured surface and knead it for 2 to 3 minutes, after which you'll deposit your dough into a greased bowl, rotating the dough around so that it gets fully covered in the oil, covering the whole affair, and letting it rest for 2 hours at room temperature, in which time the dough will have time to rise to not quite double its volume. Okay, lightly greasing a pie pan, uncover the dough and then gently poke the dough with your fingers to release some trapped gas. Divide the dough into roughly 14 pieces, I went with about 9, shape them into round buns, and arrange it in the pie pan to form a kinda flower shape. Cover the dough yet again, and let it rest for an additional hour, in which time the dough will proof for a second time. Undose on 3 fundo, or 180 degrees Celsius for you Celsius folks. It was at this time that I improvised and made a topping out of brown sugar and the nuts that I didn't put in the dough earlier. After the hour is up, uncover your dough and using a knife, lightly score the tops of your nut bread little boys in a cross pattern. Then bake your nut bread for 25 minutes. That's it for part 2. Stick around for part 3 later in the stream, where we'll reap the rewards of this labor of love and taste our nut bread. See you then. Welcome to part 3. The 25 minutes is up, and it's time to take your boys out of the oven. Gaze upon your creation, and bask in the glory of what you've just made. Nut bread. Now you're going to want these to hang out for about 15 minutes before you start digging into them, but once that 15 minutes is up, choose one lucky buoy, and with a paring knife, cut around the edges to separate your lucky buoy from its nut brethren, and serve yourself.
That's excellent. The consistency is similar to somewhere between a dinner roll and a Hawaiian roll, but the spices really have this homey, sort of comforting vibe, and the nuts on top. I mean, it's nut bread after all. Just it goes everything. It's a full ensemble. Alright folks, that is it. We have made nut bread.
Albeit there were some complications, we still in the end got what we wanted, I think. If you like this recipe, go ahead and type in !nut bread into the chat to see the recipe that I used here, as well as the recipe that I was supposed to use. Those aren't the same thing. I want to thank Josh so much for having me on for this segment of making or trying to make nut bread. So that's all from me. Please enjoy all the upcoming acts. They're going to be absolutely spectacular. We'll close out Virtual VGM Fest Ultimate with a bang.